very, very big match starting in Chennai Friday. India, England, especially given the fact how India beat Australia 2-1. You have England extending their fairly good overseas record by beating Sri Lanka 2-0. Joe Root's 100th Test match. How riveting is this series going to be?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, anytime that England go to India, it's always interesting, right? There was a long period where England didn't go to India. You know, there was the 93 tour and then they didn't go back for like 8 years. But yeah, I mean, it always produces interesting cricket. And I think the way that India performed in Australia, I think England will do very well to come away with a Test victory, to be honest. I think, you know, if you think what happened last time, I mean, they were soundly beaten. You know, had Karen Nair scoring triple hundreds against them. And I think probably their spin bowling's worse this time than last time. So we'll just have to wait and see, really. But yeah, no, India, anytime you get to watch cricket in India is fantastic. The only real shame is that you're not going to see the passionate fans in the crowd, which is something all of us are starting to miss, right? It does kind of make you realise throughout all of this pandemic that people watching sport is kind of what makes sport, right? Without that, it's kind of a bit of a strange endeavour. You know, I think what we're seeing as the professionalism of cricket in India expands over, you know, the period that the IPL's been around. You know, we're going into a long time of the IPL being around. It was 13 seasons now. And the professionalism and money from that trickling down to the associations, and then more and more kids taking up the sport. The depth that they have now, it's just absolutely unbelievable. You know, there's lots of guys that aren't getting to play very much Test cricket they were from another country, they'd be playing every single game. You know, imagine having Riddiman Saha and Rishabh Pant and having to choose between the two. You know, there's lots of Test countries that would be, you know, Australia, for example, would be delighted to have that problem, right? Now, England are quite blessed in the wicket-keeping department. But you know what I mean? Like, you just kind of look through that squad and you're like, well, you know, maybe Jasprit Bumrah is not available, but, you know, you've got Ishant Sharma, you know, he can come in and do a job for you. Mohammad Siraj, I thought, was just absolutely fantastic in Australia. First overseas tour, first Test matches. And I think that's another thing as well, is like these guys have got that big match temperament from playing in these games in front of 100,000 people with all of the attention on them. So when they do get to a big match like this, it doesn't matter so much to them personally. So I think there's lots of advantages there. And I think we're going into a period where we're going to see Indian domination of cricket that we haven't seen. They're going to be like Australia in the 2000s, I think that's the point that I think you're going to come to, is that they're just going to start winning absolutely everything. You know, you've got guys that are coming of age exactly the right time, and then another group of players coming up behind them. You know, you've got Shubman Gill kicking around, Mayank Agarwal coming around, who's only just started playing. Yeah, they're just really good. And I love watching them play. I suppose the interesting is a question for you guys is, should Rahane be captaining, having done so well in India, or should Kohli come straight back in? Now, there's the question, the real question.
It's a very good question, and I see how you've nicely stuck that in. Look, I mean, we've also been speaking about this both off camera and in front of it. On the one hand, you know, you have Virat Kohli, who's won 33 of 56 Test matches, taking nothing away from that. There is the fact that a majority of those wins did, of course, come at home, and his overseas record is not anywhere near the greatest. But then you look at Rahane, you know, are you going to judge him just on 5 wins? Yes, that team went from 36 all out to Melbourne, then the Great Escape at Sydney, and the Gabba. As outstanding as that been, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, how much of that was Rahane and how much of that was the coaching? How much of it was the senior things? What we've heard from people in the team environment is it was more of like a selection call. It's a selection call. So on that one hand, I
just think that winning attitude comes from Kohli. Even in Ajinkya Rahane and in the whole team, it comes from Virat Kohli. It's him sort of just drilling it down the team that we've got to win at all costs. And I think that does not, I would think that comes from Kohli more than Ajinkya Rahane. And that belief, it was also a big part in how they won, you know. So yeah, no. I still
And
think
I-
Virat Kohli.
And I've been an open critic of Virat Kohli's captaincy over the last few years, but somehow I still feel inside brushing him aside right now is not the good idea. Maybe wait out this year and see. Because face it, Rahane itself, the batsman, was not doing much for a long time, so there were doubts over him. But I think as good as it was.
I just think it's a great thing that we have two in the team who can captain as well as they do. I mean, I think it's just like in every other department, it's a bit of a problem of plenty here.
Your thoughts, Peter?
I mean, I think, it's a group thing, right? And that's kind of the big thing that's come out of the Indian camp. And I think when Ravi Shastri was given the job as coach, I was kind of a bit like, okay, he doesn't really had a huge amount of experience in coaching, obviously huge media personality, all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
But he's obviously done quite well at being kind of the patriarch of this particular group of people that travel around more than any other cricket team. So, I don't know how much captaincy makes a difference, to be honest. I mean, to be honest, how much, going back to that team in Australia in the early 2000s, how much was Ricky Ponting or Steve Waugh captaining, and how much was he just saying to Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne, take 20 wickets, please, lads. There is an element of just a captain's only as good as his bowlers, right? I mean, when you've got two very closely matched teams, obviously these small percentages work. But I also think it's interesting, if you look across world cricket, there does seem to be a default position that you make your best batsman the captain, right?
Absolutely.
If you think of, and is that always the right thing? Should it be someone who is, should it move around more than it does? And should you take some of the pressure off people? Because you've seen, like, if you're a captain of one of these big teams that are traveling all the time, right? You can just see it breaking people. I mean, how many captains have you just seen doing teary press conferences where they're just done, and they're the most mentally tough people you can imagine?
And the two biggest batsmen of the previous generation were both given the captaincy. It did not work with them at all. Sachin Tendulkar and Brian Lara. Lara actually took a break and went off to play golf for some months. He just couldn't deal with it, And Sachin, the BCCI gave him a second chance. That also didn't work out, So I see it. But I think just with Virat Kohli, it's the Virat Kohli era, no matter which way you look at it, and how much influence he gets. So
I love him. It's like I'd watch him opening a can of Coca-Cola. That's how much I love him. If he does anything, I'm like, I just want to watch him all the time. But yeah, no, he's fascinating. And I think England maybe have the same thing. That they've done the same thing with their captaincy, where it's gone from being, Andrew Strauss probably, they gave it to KP, who was clearly their best batsman. Didn't work out.
Yep.
They went to Andrew Strauss, who was obviously an automatic pick, but wasn't their best player, and he did a great job. And then from there, they were like, well, we'll give it to our best batsman, Alistair Cook. Alistair Cook's captaincy, I think, is probably a qualified success in the time that he was in charge. They won that series in India in 2012, which the English and Australian obsession with the Ashes is something that I just find mind-blowing. I don't really understand why this series is, there was previews going into a white ball series in South Africa that was talking about how this impacts the Ashes in 19 months time, and I was like,
wow.
There's a T20 World Cup before that. It's like, why are we talking about the Ashes? But that's kind of, it's a very, very strange obsession, I think. But I think England captains tend to be judged on how they do in Ashes series, right? So Michael Vaughan is considered to be one of the great England captains because of that 2005 win, right? Andrew Strauss obviously won in 2009 and then in Australia in 10-11, which is something that doesn't happen very often. I think the whole, again, cricket's a very strange sport, and
That's why we love it.
I've given up trying to explain to people why it's great. You either love it or you don't. It is, as my wife often tells me, it is just men hitting a ball with a stick. And she'll say, throw the ball, hit the ball, don't even bother running. That's her impression of cricket.
I love it.
So, but the obsession with captaincy, I think, is one of the more interesting things. But it gives us something to talk about, right? And that's always a good thing. And I think Joe Root's fine as captain. I think he's obviously has the support of the team around him. him and Joss Butler are, you know, very, very good mates and do a very decent job at kind of steering that ship. I think Butler's more influential than people give him credit for, actually, in that culture kind of thing.